now that we have that image placed, we can get into the formal layout details on this piece. And that's bringing in the content. And it's really where InDesign shines when it comes to formatting content. So what we're looking at here, just looking at the sample, we've got a few things going on that we'll be working through. The content is set in 2 columns, and I'm just going to make a note of this for a moment. So we have 2-column body copy, and we have a subheading in a sans serif typeface. So that's of course going to make more sense once we've had our type lecture together, but the subheading in the sans serif and the body copy in a serif typeface. And we have the logo, we'll call that a logo, the smaller image there, brought in with a type wrap. And a couple other things that we have going on here. The credit is what we call a span columns. And finally, this is something that we'll see in the copy, where we see paragraph spaces is actually what we use as space after. We actually code that space in. Don't worry when I say code, it doesn't mean we're going to be doing coding, but the spaces are, there's no characters such as a return that are creating that space. That'll make more sense soon. So these are what we're going to be working through, all of these in this content. The great thing about this assignment is that most of this will, from this point on, be part of our lives working with InDesign. And I'll just go through and point out in each instance what we're looking at. So 2-column copy. This here is the 2 columns. Pretty straightforward. All the copy brought in, and we actually make the text frame itself into 2 columns. It's not separate text frames. The subheading, so that's the subheading of course, and the body copy in the serif typeface. And the logo placed in, and then a text wrap is applied to the logo itself. So a text wrap is something that we apply to an object that we want the type not to touch. And that is essentially, it's like a little force field around the object. So we're applying a text wrap or type wrap to the object, not to the type that we want to have wrapping around it. The other thing I noticed in here that I should note is that we have 2-column body copy that is justified, or also known as fully justified. So that's indicating that it's clean edges on the left and the right side of the columns. So we have some settings to go through there. And finally, down at the bottom with the credit, this is all in one type frame, but this content is spanned across the column. So that is what we call a column span, but we're simply allowing that content to break the barrier of the center of the column itself. Okay, and then yes, space after. So here, where we would be tempted to just do return and let the copy have its space, we actually use some settings up here, and they should be showing up here. Here we go, space after, and this is how we open up, and I'll show you an example just with what I'm using there. So what that does is it means there's no actual characters. Returns and spaces and invisible characters are still characters. that we want to avoid in our type. So we'll be working with that as well. So although it looks quite simple, there's a lot of details in here that are happening that we're going to carry on throughout the term. So let's get some content in. I'm going to move this over here. And just like we place the images in, if we have what's termed clean content, meaning if our content doesn't have extraneous notes or anything that we may not be able to catch upon inserting it, we can just go File, Place to that document and drop it in. So we're going to go File and Place, or Command D, and we'll go to our content file, and it has the title in it, so we'll remove that and we'll put it up above on the image, and the rest is all there as we need it. So we'll say Open. Now in this case we have a couple of options, and I'll show you both. We can just go into our content here and we can click, and it will fall into the margins by default with its own text frame. So this is a text frame that it's created. Or we can click and drag if we want to be more specific. And when I click and drag, I can hold my space bar down and I can move the frame, let off space, and I can almost designate the size and location of the frame using my space bar and my mouse. And once I let go of my mouse, then it will place itself. So that gives us two ways to place that content in. And looking at the location of the content here, I'm just looking for any cues in the image so that I can line it up. But it appears to be about a 1/2 inch from the edge. And although I created this a while ago, I can't remember really the details of measurement, so we're going to try our best to replicate the spacing the best we can. And we'll have to do some guessing on the type size as well, but that's okay. So let's get this title out. I'm going to copy this title. So just you'll see when I work with the type, I double clicked. Even if I'm on my main selection tool, if I double click, it will activate my cursor, and you see the blinking cursor there, and then I can just highlight, copy, Command C, or I can right click, or I can go up to Edit menu and copy. But learning, of course, Command C for copy and Command V for paste is definitely something we want to do since we use those so often. So copy, Command C, and I'll delete it out. And I'm going to mention this as well. The forward delete, so that means deleting this way, on the Macs anyway, is the function key down in the lower left corner and delete. So I'm holding the FN key down, the FN key in the lower left, and delete, and that lets me delete forward. And the reason I'm doing that, after I copied the title out, I want to get rid of that unnecessary space in my text frame. Now I'll go to my type tool again. I'm going to go in here, just click and drag to make a type frame and paste into that. My cursor is blinking upon making that type frame. So there's my title, and we'll work on that first. Looking at this, and if I remember correctly, I know that's Helvetica. So if you don't have Helvetica, that's okay. I'm actually going to check for a moment to see if I gave you the document fonts. So you will have Helvetica in those fonts. And I'll go to Helvetica. I'm just going to do a Helvetica bold. And now sizing type, of course, you have to have it highlighted, and in all of these programs you have to highlight or click or select whatever you want to do something to. You have to let it know this is what we're doing that to. And when I highlight that, I can go up to my sizing here in my top panel. I can have my character palette open if I want, so I could go to my type and character, and it will bring up my type sizes in there and my typefaces. I can also use command keys, which is what I do. I typically do Command Shift and my greater than key. And if I add Option into that, Command Shift Option and my greater than, and the greater than is the arrow above the period, and lesser than being the arrow over the comma, I can increase in larger segments. But it looks like this may not be bold. It looks like it might be regular after all, or maybe even a heavy. So I might have to go to another Helvetica here and look for maybe a medium or something. You can see Helvetica is one of those typefaces that has a lot of fonts in it, a lot of categories. So that looks better, like a medium. Now, because I'm looking for a specific size and I know this is centered, I'm going to do a couple things here. And this is where I start to really make sure I'm working precise with the layout. So I'm going to bring in some guides at the 1/2 inch mark. So I'm going to go back to my default cursor there, my main cursor, click on the ruler here, and I'll bring a guide out to 1/2 inch. Or sorry, 1 inch, because we're 1/2 inch in with the margin. So I'm going to go a 1/2 inch in, and I'm looking up here to my measure, but I'm also able to follow the little tag on the guide that gives me the number. So 1 inch there, and then I'll go to the 7.5 inch mark over on this side. And what that does is it just gives me the guides so I can go back, move this frame over, and I'm going to grab, this is called a handle. This frame has handles at each corner and handles in the center of each side, and I can, using my main cursor, I can drag across that handle, or grab that handle and drag across to the guide. Okay, so again, if you get this far, you've achieved something simply by getting these things placed. Every little step, as we learn in design, is a goal achieved, we'll say. And don't feel bad if it's taking you time even to do those little things, and if you have to go back and watch me do it over again, absolutely. If we were in class, that's how we would be doing it. I would be going back and doing this repeatedly while you guys look at your computers and look up at the screen and so on. So rewinding and going back and watching this repeatedly is absolutely advisable and understandable. So I'm going to highlight this type, and I'm going to change it to white so I can see it. So I'll go up here, and you can see now our fill color has turned to a T, meaning that we're about to color type. And I'll just change it to white, choosing paper. And now again in my settings, I have the alignment. So this may be familiar to you from something like Word and a text program. So I'm just going to use the center align here and get that moved into the center of the page. Now I can continue sizing it in hopes that I can get it to reach that 1/2 inch guide. And in fact, what I may have to do is make my type frame a little bigger in order to get that to land correctly, but we'll see. So I'll use my key command. So Command Shift and my greater than key. And now it's sizing from the center out. So it went too far. So now what it's showing me, and you may see this down here as well, it's showing me this little red warning sign. And that is what we call Overset Type. That little red box is showing me that we have Overset Type and there's too much content in that frame for it to show. That the type is oversetting the frame. So I'm going to go back a bit. And you can, of course, change the size up here. You can enter the numbers. You can choose the presets. You can even highlight the numbers here and use your up arrow and down arrow, and it will change them that way as well. So I'm close here, and I think I'm okay with that, where it's landing. I don't need to go exactly the 1/2 inch. But I noticed on this piece that, and I like how this lands, that the V is landing in alignment with the iceberg. And it looks as though once this was set, there was some tracking and kerning adjusted, because Helvetica as a default is quite poor. It has very poor kerning. That means the space between some individual letters is a little too wide. So once I'm at this point, and if you're wondering, this is 44 point Helvetica New 65 medium. I'm going to select all of this. So often what I do is I just get my cursor live in there, and I'll do Command A to select all, or you can just highlight. And I'm going to adjust first the tracking. The tracking is the equal space across the entire line, the spacing between characters, adjusting it equally. We'll be talking about that in our type lectures. However, I'm going to hold my Option key down while I have this highlighted, and I'm going to hit my left arrow once, and that's going to close the tracking a little bit. Now I'm going to go through, because this is a title, I'm going to zoom in on it, Space Command, and I'm going to look for an opportunity just to fix some kerning, just to equate the spacing a little more. There's a couple spots where I'm going to do it. One is at the I here, between the I and the C, so I get my cursor blinking live there by double clicking, and then I'm going to hold Option, use my left arrow just a couple times. And I'm going to do it, everything else looks pretty good here, except one more place that I know I want to do it is to get the V in line here. So I'm going to close this space a bit. So Option and left arrow. So I don't want to go too far, so that's going to allow me to increase the spacing on this probably a little bit, or sorry, the size. And this time I'm going to use my scaling. So just like with images, where we do Command Shift, click and drag to scale an image and its frame, we're going to do Command Shift, and I'm going to add Option in there. Oops. Command Shift Option, and it will scale while I click and drag from the center out. So that will let me get approximately to the 1/2 inch mark. And now, looking at this, I really want to line that up. I'm going to bring this down a bit to see how it aligns. So a few things going on there. When I scaled that, I did Command Shift Option, click and drag, and that lets me do the central, this, I don't know if it's centrifugal or what, but scaling from the center out. So Command Shift Option, click and drag. Now I've lost where I had it, so I'm going to just undo back to where I was. And then I'm going to click on this to move it down a bit. Now when I move it down, it falls a little more into alignment with that. And it's okay that it's gone beyond those guides. Those guides were simply that. They were just guides for placement. What I like about this one, it landed so well that even the L, the vital part, is kind of landing in the shadow of the iceberg. But I could probably move this over a bit by, again, kerning. So Option and my left key, but not too concerned about that at the moment. So that's placed roughly where I want it, or not roughly, it's good enough, it's where I want it. And I'm going to take a look. I'm going to press W while I'm not in a type frame and just see how that's looking. So far it's okay, nothing's standing out as a problem yet. And W again to go back to working mode. And we're going to work on this content now. And there's a couple things that are interesting about this, and When it was laid out, I imagine I did it more consciously than I remember, but the ice sheets part, including the colon, lines up nicely with the columning, while vital signs lines up nicely with this column. And while that aligns with the iceberg, all those little details are something that sometimes they're happy accidents. Usually we have to do a little bit of tracking and kerning to get something like that to work, and very specific sizing, but it actually worked well there. We may or may not be able to replicate that in this situation, but I don't see why we can't, so I'm going to try. So I'm going to, again, I'm on my main cursor. I'm just going to move this type frame around a bit into where I can at least think it's going to be sized correctly. So I'm going to move this over, and I'm holding my shift key down so that I constrain it in its motion. And I'm going to grab this handle and move this one out to the guide. So I moved the whole frame, then I just grabbed the side handle here to get it to align with the side. And I still have my overset type there, so I'm going to pull that down a bit so we see all the content. So right now we don't have room at the moment for this blue box down here, but we're going to get to that. Now, first we saw in the list of things that were being done to this, we have the 2 column and it's justified. So that is 2 columns of type and the alignment is justified, meaning the left and the right are clean edge. They're not what we call ragged edge like this is now. This is currently left justified, rag right. But we're going to do justified, or it's also known as fully justified. And then when we get in there, we'll be able to get even more specific. So this is kind of working from general to getting more and more specific with the content. So now I'm going to select that type frame. And this is a little different because on the laptops, if you're working on a laptop, they don't have the screen space to show everything that's typically in this ribbon across the top. And that's okay. There's several ways to access and do certain things. What we want to do at the moment is change this column to 2 columns. So if you look up in the ribbon, you may see the number of columns symbol, these 3 bars here. It's currently set to 1. If you don't see that, that's okay. You can go to the object menu and go down to text frame options, which is Command B. And when you open that up, you can change the number of columns there. I often go in here if I'm specifying my column width, or if I do need to change the gutters. We'll find that there's opportunities at times, especially in magazines, to balance our columns, but we also run into some difficulties doing that. So this is where we really start to dig into details of InDesign. Right now we just want to change the columns. So if you're not able to see the symbol on the ribbon, you can do it here and just change that to 2. And this is in the General tab under Columns. And whenever you have the opportunity, and in InDesign, most of the windows have it now, you'll want to change it to Preview, or click on Preview, and that will show you again what's going to happen if you click OK. So we can see this is going to change to 2 columns, and it looks good, so we'll do that. And it changed up here as well. Okay, so we've got our 2 columns of type. Now we can go back, knowing this is a text, it's a text frame, it's also an object. We have a few things that we need to clean up. So first I'm just going to see how far I can close this up before it goes to Overset Type. So about there. And then as we do our justification and our settings, we're going to start absorbing some space. The first part here, we're going to absorb this by going in front of Arctic Sea here and just deleting. and closing that space. And looking at where the paragraphs are, we can see that there's a paragraph ahead of the shrink and swell cycles and ahead of while. So we're seeing those paragraphs in a couple of places, but it's due to returns probably in the content. Now we're going to go up to our type menu and we're going to change this to show hidden characters. That's going to show us a lot about what's going on in this in the text of this file. So showing hidden characters, bottom of the type menu. And now we can see, I'm going to zoom in, we can see that these are returns. So a return, it's actually showing the end of the paragraph. This is indicating that everything preceding it is a paragraph. Everything preceding this one is a paragraph, and so on. But we're used to, in our text programs, and if we're not familiar with the proper ways to use InDesign and so on, we're used to actually using the return by doing this to create space. That's incorrect. We actually very much have to get out of the habit of doing that when it comes to working with InDesign and typesetting. And there's a few reasons for that that we'll discuss in class, but the primary reason is that everything goes into digital now, especially things like ebooks and e-newsletters, and this doesn't carry over properly in the code, and therefore it would close that space. So we use our tools to code in that space into our document. More about that later, but what we're going to do is eliminate those spaces right now. So I'm going to go to ahead of shrink and swell, and I'm going to delete. We've done it there, and I'm going to delete here, and here, and here. So now this type is ready to really dig into the formatting.